I had an advantage most people didn't have. My mom got murdered when I was 7, and she was 30 years old. And I constantly had to remind myself that 10 seconds before she died, she had no idea she was living her last 10 seconds. Like when my...
How do you balance short-term operational demands with a long-term strategic planning in a fast-paced industry?
All right, so how do you balance short-term operational needs against long-term strategic planning in a high-speed, in a high-paced industry? The answer is this. All organizations need to start with a set of core values on how it is we do business. We have 5 core values: transparency, authenticity, expertise, humility, servant leadership. We make all decisions based on those 5 core values. Okay. Number 2, we have a mission statement that says this is what our ultimate goal is. Our ultimate goal strategically is to help save and create middle-class jobs. Then we have some technical strategies for helping manufacturers do that. Okay, and those technical strategies are, we start with digital strategy and we use an iterative approach on a common digital infrastructure in order to allow organizations to iterate and solve problems digitally, with a goal on, in phase 1, if I spend N on man hours, and in phase 2, I want to deploy the solution I did in phase 1 to some other area. If we use the right technical strategy, the right technical architecture, then it should require 0.4 N man hours to do it the second time. Okay, it should cut the labor each iteration. Okay, that is the long-term strategy, and that's the mission. The difference between the long-term strategy and the mission is all of the short-term operational decisions you make are underneath that umbrella. If your short-term operational needs are in direct conflict with your long-term strategy, then there's something wrong with the way that you are implementing your operational strategy based on your long-term strategy. And so you must make sure that it is obvious. The short-term operational decision I make naturally follows from my long-term strategy, not it's opposing one another. This is where most organizations fall short. And the reason where most organizations fall short is this. You know, in the culture we have today of environmental, ESG, right? ESG is a big metric for whether companies get investment dollars from investors. Organizations will say things about their values and their mission and their strategy that they don't actually mean. They'll say that we care about the environment. They'll say that we care about equity. We'll say that we care about oversight, but that's not what the organization actually cares about. And so when you see the conflict on the plant floor or in the operational sector, operations focuses on what you really care about. So if you're saying your strategy is one thing and operations is doing what you actually care about, that's where you're going to see your natural conflict. So the answer is, you must make sure that the short-term strategy or the long-term strategic vision is what you actually mean. You shouldn't be paying lip service.
So, I say a company does not have all established from the get-go, and they're trying to redirect in that direction. How possible do you think that is?
If you just sort of, in the beginning, you don't have a values and you don't have a mission, and you just sort of, hey, I want to make something and sell it, right? I think you would struggle right out the gate. I think it's why most organizations struggle right out the gate. And when they go back to the drawing board, hey, what it is that we're doing wrong? Oh, our values, here's why values matter. Values isn't a term, it's not lip service. Values are the tools you use to make the right decision when faced with a dilemma. Like if you want consistent outcomes, you have to make consistent decisions. And the way you make those decisions are based on core values. A dilemma is when you have to choose between more than one options, and the one you should choose isn't apparent. Like the perceived outcome are likely equally bad or equally good. That's a dilemma. So how do you make sure you pick the right one? The answer is you make the decision based on the core values. Most organizations struggle in the beginning because They'll make the right decision in this case, they'll make the wrong decision in that one, they'll make the right decision here, they'll make the wrong decision there. One step forward, one step back. 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Most organizations, if they're going to be successful over the long term, have to at some point say, this is how we make decisions. And most organizations revisit that sooner rather than later.
I think with the proliferation of social media, we're increasingly living in a society that takes other people's values and ideas and makes it their own to an extent. But I think, and it clearly seems like the best approach is to figure out what your values are for yourself.
I think the best thing for most young people to do is to find someone who has values that resonate with you and start there and then modify them. It's a big hurdle for a lot of people to jump to say, what do I believe? What do I stand for? Right? But when someone says, I believe X and I stand for Y, as long as you're self-aware, as long as you can be honest with yourself, hey, I actually really believe that. I'm not saying I believe that because I think that's what I'm supposed to say, but it is something I actually believe. I think it's much easier for young people to go, what that person's saying makes a lot of sense. What they stand for makes a lot of sense. I think I'm going to start there, and I'm not going to follow them. I'm just going to start with what they stand for, what their core values are. And then I'm going to modify over time. If you look at my 5 core values of transparency, authenticity, expertise, humility, and servant leadership, that came from 3 pillars that my parents had, which was discipline, respect, and hard work. Their pillars didn't work for me in my adult life. I started with discipline, respect, and hard work, and then that grew into transparency, authenticity, expertise, humility, and servant leadership. But I started with what my parents gave me. If your parents don't, my parents used to preach that discipline, respect, hard work. So if you don't have someone preaching that, whether that's your pastor or your coach or your parents, then you can turn through social media to find someone who does, and then turn it into your own. If you're self-aware enough and you can jump that hurdle of putting it down on paper on your own, do it. But if you run into a brick wall, don't stop. Pivot and go find, ask yourself who resonates with me.
What questions do you think someone can ask themselves to start the process or become more self-aware?
I would say this. This is where I think all young people should start. Go to the end of your life. Go to the 10 seconds before you die. Now, whether that's in a car accident at 40, in a hospice care at 60, or whether that's in your bed at 90, look back on your life and answer for yourself what you want to say. What I said was, I want my life to have mattered. I want people to say that when they came into contact with me, I left them better off than when they met me. I said that mattered to me. I said that I wanted to leave a legacy through my children. I said that I didn't care whether people liked me. I cared whether or not people believed that I did good. Like, I had a positive impact. You can dislike me and still say I had a positive impact. That's what I said. And then I reverse engineered that. Well, what would it take in order for me to be able to do that? I worked my way back. And discipline, respect, and hard work wasn't enough. And that's why I said, I needed that servant leadership component in order for me to be able to say that people would say at the end of my life that that when I left their life, they were better off than when I entered it. I needed that servant leadership component. I needed that expertise component. In order to be able to build teams and have an impact with my kids, I needed the humility component. And in order to just be real with people, I needed transparency and authenticity. That's how I got to those, by going to that moment in my life and reverse engineering back and going, okay, discipline, respect, and hard work are important, but they're not enough for me to use them as my guiding principles.
I'm not sure what question I'm trying to ask with this, but it's my perception that we're living in a society that is increasingly thinking more and more short term. So now I think people would think long term like you did, or even long term like people did in the past.
How is it people can look long? What people today look very short term. How is it they can train themselves to look long term? I had an advantage most people didn't have. My mom got murdered when I was 7, and she was 30 years old. And I constantly had to remind myself that 10 seconds before she died, she had no idea she was living her last 10 seconds. Like when my stepdad killed her, when she closed her eyes, he killed her while she was sleeping on a couch. When she closed her eyes, she had no idea that she wasn't going to wake up the next day. She was 30. She thought she had her whole life ahead of her. If you had asked her that night what she was going to do in 10 years, she's like, I'll worry about it in 10 years. I had that constant reminder. That was an advantage I had. So let's say I didn't have that advantage. I think what I would do, and I say this to people who are depressed, people who are like, even if they say they want to commit suicide or something, I'll say, all right, you have a right to commit suicide, but why don't you go spend some time volunteering in a soup kitchen first before you do that? Why don't you spend some time with people who aren't as blessed as you? That will make you look longer term. It will make you look beyond the 8 inches in front of your face. Another really good one is to go out into the mountains on a really, really clear, cold night and look at the stars. And you'll see eternity. You won't see the 8 inches in front of your face. Your mind will wander. You'll touch every moment in history over the last 5 billion years through your eyes. I think just like we have to train muscles, I think we have to train our minds. And it requires deliberate focus and intention.
Is there anything left on this matter relating to all of this that we're talking about that you don't want to say?
I would say this. I think because people have such a short-term view, young people today look so short-term. And I think young people have done that, have had a tendency to look shorter term than adults did. But I think it's much more pronounced today. I think I agree with you. Young people have a tendency to believe that everything is the end of the world because they look so short term. And I think if there was any lesson that I would teach young people about that specifically, is that gaining the proper perspective in any given situation is really important. One of the things that, it was a joke my mom said to me when I was young, I was a teenager, 15, 16. She said, you need to change your perspective. Why don't you go stand on the couch? And I was like, what? And she said, go stand on the couch. And I literally walked over to the couch and stood on the back of the couch. I had my hand on the ceiling. And I was looking at a room I had been in thousands of times. And it looked completely different because I was standing on the couch. I was now 8 feet tall. That really wired something in me to realize, holy shit, the way we see any situation is a function of how we see every situation. And so in order for us to see something different in that situation the next time we experience it, we have to change our perspective.